Trigger warning. Mentions of suicidal ideation and self-harm throughout the episode. If you need support, resources can be found in our show notes.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Jack Amplified. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite, and this week we come to you with not one but three amazing guests. Before we get to those guests, I should remind you, May is Mental Health Month, and today we really want to have a great conversation around kind of moving away from this crisis-built system into impactful conversations and how to start those, how to have those, and why they matter moving forward. And we're going to have those conversations. Now, listen, Jack Amplified is all about sharing information, dropping knowledge. We can only do that if you follow, subscribe, and like, so we encourage you to do so as we grow and move this message across the country, around the world. We're going to have a great conversation today with three brilliant young people. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about themselves. Today we have Akuol, Ashlinn, and Akib with us today. Akuol, we'll start with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. It's really great to be a chance to be a part of this podcast. My name is Akuol, and my pronouns are she, her. I am from Saskatchewan, but I go to school in BC, and I'm a sociology student, a psychology minor.
Thanks so much. Akib, we'll go to you, and then Ashlinn will save you for last.
Awesome. Thank you so much from my end as well. Thank you so much for inviting me to this awesome podcast series. I am super excited to have this conversation. About myself, I am Mohammed Akib. I am joining in from Regina, Saskatchewan. I am a newcomer and immigrant here in Canada. I moved back in 2021, and here in Regina, I am a youth advocate and a student leader, and I'm really excited to join you guys this morning.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ashlinn. My pronouns are she, her. I am a member of the Youth Voice Council along with my colleagues here. And I'm a Master of Science student entering into my second year, and I'm studying psychology. I'm from Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm born and raised here. And I have two wonderful cats who I told I was recording a podcast, but they are running around in the background, of course. So if you hear crashes and bangs, just pretend you don't.
Animals are our friends, and they're friends of the podcast, so they are welcome. Ashlinn, thank you, everyone, for joining today, taking time out of your busy schedules to have this conversation. Speaking of conversations, part of changing the way we kind of debunk the stigma around mental health is having those early conversations. Akuol, how does seeing one person be brave enough, have the courage enough to start a conversation, change the permission levels for the rest of the group or the classroom to talk about it?
Yeah. So it is really, I find scary to be one of the first ones to open up and start those conversations, but those are the most important ones to have. And it's really just starting that is the most important step. And what it means to do that is to put yourself in a place where you are open and being vulnerable. Because from my experience, I believe that vulnerability breeds more vulnerability from other people, showing that, hey, I'm not feeling okay, from my experience, receive a lot of empathy from folks. And it also shows that it's okay to not always show this normal mask, and that you're not alone also, I find. And that's something that is really prominent when you're dealing with mental health struggles. You do feel like you're alone. So opening it up and starting these conversations, whether it's in the classroom, with your friends, or with your family, shows that, hey, like, you're not the only one struggling, and that it is possible to get help. It really just starts with taking that first step. And once you've taken that first step, it opens up so many doors to different opportunities for help or continuing that conversation.
Yeah, it's so odd in a sense that so many of us are suffering in silence, and that fear of speaking out, for being that first person, because the fear of what, Yeah, and being embarrassed or, and as you just said, I mean, more often than not, we are more alike than we are different. Where people are like, "Whoa, I'm not the only one," because we all, for some weird reason, even though this affects, all of us, always think we're kind of on our own, or it might be, what if it's just me, right? And in fact, it is not. Ashlyn, sometimes the most important conversations happen without many words, right? How do you recognize when a peer or friend is trying to start a conversation but doesn't have the vocabulary yet? They're trying to tell you that, but they just can't kind of put it into those clinical words.
I've been thinking about this question, and I really think it boils down to someone asking you intimately about your experience. Reaching out to you because they know that you've struggled with mental health, and asking a lot of those questions that, for me, kind of serve as a primer for opening up the conversation to talk about themselves. I think oftentimes it can be easier to talk to someone who has been open, who has started that conversation around their own mental health, rather than, jumping right in and saying that they're struggling. So I think the most important thing that we can do for peers that maybe aren't ready to start that conversation yet themselves is to be open and to invite them to share, but to not pressure that. Um, I think it just truly boils down to like being open, and allowing that space for them to exist as they are, to ask any questions they have, um, and not pressure it to go any further.
I think what you're saying there too is so important, right? Because what we know from data just recently too that we worked on with UNICEF is we surveyed over 4,000 young people, and they said their first point of informal um, help or support is through parent, friend, partner, right? Now, parents are like, wow, they'll actually come to me? Yes, once. If you're not open, if you're not receptive to it, they may not come back. Same thing with a friend. I'm going to test the waters, and if it doesn't go well, I'm going to shut down. Right, so it's so important, and it speaks to the work that Jack.org does a little bit too, right? Not to put pressure on people, but to really be open to listening and receptive, so that person doesn't shut down because they finally have the courage to do that. Let's open that door. Akib, to that point, I think when you see something isn't quite right and you press a friend and they throw that line at you, I'm fine. How do you get past I'm fine, right? And that's this sometimes people's way of, they don't want to admit that you're seeing something that they're not quite fine, but they're embarrassed or a little ashamed around it.
It actually keeps taking me back to all the other conversations we have having since this morning. Like in situations like that, in order for us to move past the I'm fine phase, is first of all by us being empathetic. I can probably, like, if someone is being uncomfortable, or if they're not willing to share their story, I can probably start by sharing a part of mine, just to make myself a bit vulnerable in front of them, to show that, hey, like, you're not the only one. I am someone who has gone through this, or I am aware of someone who has been going through something similar. So you're not alone. And that is why I love the power of storytelling, because it gives the feeling of not being the only one going through something in that situation. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love showing a little bit of vulnerability opens that door right past I'm fine, right? And
100%.
kind of opens it up to the conversation. And listen, when we have these conversations, it's not one and done. Hey, I'm good, good. We talk this through, and it's not an after-school special. Everyone goes off and they're happy. Akuol, let's talk about that. There's the first conversation. How do we ensure that that conversation continues, maybe to a second or third conversation?
Yeah, for sure. I know I talked about the first conversation, but to make sure that it keeps going, I think the first thing is making sure to check in on your friend. So if you're the person where someone they've confided in you, just checking on your friend and being like, hey, like, I remember we talked about this the other day. Are you open to discussing this further? And making sure to let them know that, like, you can handle tough things, because I totally get it. It can be really scary confronting and talking about mental health, especially if you've never done it before. And even myself, I feel like I'm still learning how to essentially sit in the mud with somebody,
Yeah, yeah.
and being an active listener. I think that's super important. Just keeping to ask questions. If you are someone who is struggling with mental health and you want to keep the conversation going with someone that you trust, also asking them, hi, like, would you be open to discussing this right now, and making sure that it's a safe place to do so, and continuing to be open, continuing to be curious, because that continues the conversation. Once you stop talking about it, or there's not a trust developed between two people or a group of people, that's when the conversation dies. And so I really advocate for that active listening. And it does take practice, but with practice, you can definitely become better and more equipped to be able to handle conversations like these.
Yeah, and I often talk about Akuol, about how as a dad, I don't know if it's just guys in general. Sometimes we go into that fixer mode, and my kids will be like, "Hey, I'm feeling this way." I'm like, "Oh, okay, boom, boom, boom," and they're staring at me, saying, "Slow it down. I don't need you to fix what's happening." And this, I think, it applies to everyone. Is that you're an active listener. You don't need to fix them or tell them, here's what you do. It really is just sometimes about being heard. And that burden just kind of slides off your shoulders, that, someone else gets me and I have someone to talk to, and that can nod their head and understand for sure. Right. So yes, we want those conversations to continue. And if the first conversation goes well, we'll be a little more open to a second, etc. But I love what you said there around being curious as well, just dialing that in. Ashlinn, let's talk about advocacy a little bit. I think none of us wake up and say, you know what, today's the day I'm going to be an advocate. Certainly, I'm sure that didn't happen with you. You didn't talk to your cats and say, what are we going to do today? And we'll do advocacy. Can you take us back to the moment when you realized that you wanted to be part of creating impact for other youth?
So, like you said, you don't wake up and decide it. I think it was a million little moments over years. Um, I have like some specific moments that I think were really special to me. When I was deeply struggling with my mental health in my teenage years, one of my closest friends, who was also struggling with her mental health, created a box for me of 100 reasons to keep going. And they were little pieces of paper. And one that really stuck with me was that you can inspire others. And at the time, I didn't feel like that at all. At the time, I felt like, I can only make others worse. I can only make things worse in general. But that's the one that stuck with me all these years later. And that's really what I've wanted to do in all of my advocacy work. So after I started to feel better, after I started to feel more mentally well, I wanted to give back. And I found the body positivity movement. And for me, that was my first gateway into advocacy, into mental health advocacy, but into advocacy in general. Realizing that, diet culture and this world that we're in pushes us to be small, pushes us to take up the least amount of space possible. But this body positivity movement, this body neutrality movement, it does something really radical in a world that is like investing millions of dollars for you to shrink yourself. It encourages you to take up that space. And that it's okay to take up that space. That's actually a really beautiful thing. If we all ate the same, exercised the same, we would still not all look the same. And I think like that has
100%.
been something that's really resonated with me. So I got involved in the body positivity movement to try and advocate for that next generation. And largely because of these statistics this is from the National Eating Disorders.org. So if anyone wants to go look up that source, but girls as young as 5 start expressing concerns about their weight and their shape. And 40 to 60% of girls aged 6 to 12 are concerned about their weight or becoming fat. And when we factor in 2S LGBTQIA plus youth, that skyrockets to 87%. So these are children worrying about their bodies, worrying about things that, diet culture is pushing us to worry about. And for me, I want to be that change for the next generation. I don't want girls worried about these things, and any youth.
100%. Listen, I was just reading the other day about young men and this whole thing around beauty standards, and it's going earlier, like you said, 8 to 10-year-olds looking, there's influencers saying if you break your jaw a certain way, it will re-heal and be more of a square. Like, what it sounded to me like just wow. I mean, I can't believe people with self-harm, but people have been self-harming forever, right? In doing the negative body positivity. If you want to feel bad about yourself, just visit the doctor. So I'll take for example, we use something called the BMI, right? body mass index, right? And that was developed, I think, in the 1950s. And it's horrible because if you look at someone like me, I'm 6'1", I'm 250 pounds. I'm morbidly obese on that scale. And I'll say to the doc, obviously I'm not morbidly obese, but he's like, well, it doesn't take into effect muscle or bone or, whatever. I'm like, well, then why do we use it? Why are you, when young people come in and they're looking at that BMI scale, no matter what you said, and that registers morbidly obese or anything like that, right? So I mean, there's a lot to change and there's a lot to advocate for. But when people see young role models like yourself out there who are giving those positive messages, one at a time, they can and will change and see life a little differently. Akib, advocacy is heavy work at times. I think for everyone on this call right now, we've always got to be careful with the balance, right? When you're taking on a lot of heavy stuff and you're doing a lot of listening, trying to help a lot of people, you're carrying a lot with those stories. How do you stay positive, resilient, balanced when you're doing that?
Honestly, Michael, I exactly agree with you when you say that it's heavy work because you're not just carrying your own story, but also everyone else's. And it is a big responsibility and it gets overwhelming once in a while. And that is where the burnout in the advocacy sector come in. And to me personally, people's story is something that fuels me to do what I do. Every other morning I would wake up to these amazing messages from these great youth that I keep working with here in Saskatchewan, and they keep texting me and like their words of affirmation and their inspiration really keeps me going even further because they would send me amazing messages like, "Oh my God, the work you have been doing, or the fundraiser you have started, or the advocacy initiative you have started here in Regina has made a difference in my life." And trust me, I don't work like obviously my target is to work towards thousands and hundreds of people, but at the end of the day, if my work or my advocacy work is reaching one individual and it's making a real difference in their life, that's what makes the world of a difference. And
Yeah.
that is the power and the energy that fuels my day-to-day life and my advocacy work. So yeah, that's something I use to fuel myself
Very
every
cool.
morning.
I think it is, yeah. Focus, like, not to put words in your mouth, but when you focus on the small wins, this person talked to me today. This person opened up. This person wants to get more involved. They feel 1% better. Let's focus on those small wins and not, bit at a time, right? So we don't go over to, say, the negative side for sure. And this is a question to all of you. You've all got involved. You're now advocates. You're doing great work. You're changing lives. If a young person says, you know what, I want to do that. Like, how do I start as an advocate? How do I get involved? What is your advice? Anyone can jump in here.
I can start, but my number one thing would be just go for it. If there's an opportunity,
Yeah,
whether there's like a club at your school, or if there's a community organization, whether it's with Jack.org or another mental health organization, I would definitely say jump in and join that if you have the opportunity to do so. I grew up in like a smaller city in Moose Jaw, and so we didn't have Jack.org around. We didn't really have mental health clubs. And so my form of getting involved in advocacy was really just following a lot of advocates online that I was really inspired by. And also reading a lot of books and getting knowledgeable around what exactly is mental health, how do we break down these stigmas. I also think, as someone who is involved in advocacy, something that I can even do to reach kind of the broader population and see if whoever's interested in joining is inviting people. I really would say never underestimate the power of an invitation because that's how I got involved in Jack.org. Actually, it was one of my old track and field teammates who reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in applying to be a part of the Jack.org club. And at the time, it was not on my radar, but I ended up filling out an application and I joined, and it genuinely did change my life. Like, it was a very pivotal moment, and it all started from an invitation. And so I would definitely say if you are already in these fields, in these industries, reach out to someone because you never know how it might change. And it doesn't hurt to ask. The worst they can say is no. So yeah, go for it and then invitations.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, I totally agree. As someone, like, I also grew up in a very small place. I think you can sort of insert mental health advocacy into whatever you're doing, you know? If you have a local Planned Parenthood that you want to volunteer at, I think like intersectionality is such a big piece, you know? Be the change, be the person who starts to talk about reproductive mental health, you know? Perinatal anxiety, postpartum depression, mental health is everywhere. You don't necessarily need to have a space carved out just for mental health. You can be the person that carves out the space. And so, in that, like, starting your own club, starting your own community, and being to get to have a village is to be a villager, which is like a silly thing that I've been seeing online recently, but I think it's so true. You really need to show up for your community, and that means showing up where they are too. If there's no mental health organization, find where you can start that change, where you can start those conversations. That's the most impactful thing you can do.
100% awesome points, and I'd like to also like reflect on whatever you both have said. And honestly, like if I go a bit backwards towards my own journey, like, so when I moved here initially, like I had zero idea about whatever resources Canada or Regina even had to offer, And what I did in those such situations is like I just had to start somewhere, as Akuol and Ashlyn has mentioned, Like I understand that it is difficult to find resources, but at the end of the day, like you can just start local, start small, start at any organization that resonates with you. Because um, literally last night I was looking at this reel on Instagram where someone was saying that like I don't even know where to start because I don't even know what I'm passionate about, And that is absolutely understandable because advocacy is an extremely broad and really big field, and it is difficult to find your passion to begin with. But like in order to find your passion, you just have to start somewhere. And I would really appreciate anyone to start by simple volunteering activities, because I personally believe that when you give back, you grow, so giving back is extremely beautiful, and you should just start with any local initiative, and you can just start local and then go global at one point. So starting somewhere is extremely important. And as all of you mentioned, like worst people can say is no. So just give it a shot, try your best, and find your passion to action.
Love it. Wise words from all of you. Now we're going to jump to a little segment we do here called Fact or Fiction. And so I'm going to read something and then I want you to weigh in on this. Is this fact or fiction? Mental health education is just about talking about feelings. Fact or fiction? Jump in if you wish.
I can jump in on that. I'm gonna say partly fiction. I would say yes, and I think that mental health education is so much more complex than just talking about how we feel. It's also about the stereotypes in terms of why is there a taboo about mental health in communities. I think it also talks about the actions, things like self-harm, things like suicidal thoughts. And it's also about talking about ways to help promote mental health. So, talking about any types of activities. I know for myself, I love being connected to nature, talking to friends, and other ways in order to help mental health promotion. And so, it's not doesn't just end at talking about your feelings. It is important to talk about your feelings and acknowledge and validate that they're there, but there's so many other pieces that are a part of it that mental health education, effective education, should also touch on.
Well said.
Yeah, I totally agree. It really is a yes and statement. Because talking about your feelings is an important part of it, and learning about your emotions is an important part of it. But it can't stop there. Like, even, when we look at therapy and we look at counseling, psychoeducation is a huge part of getting that started. You need to learn what you're experiencing to learn how to fix what you're experiencing. So, it really boils down to that psychoeducation piece, that understanding, what you're going through, but then also becoming an expert in what you're going through, because you are the expert at the end of the day. Mental health education can help explain like what you're going through, But at the end of the day, you know you best. And I think a large part of mental health education is understanding yourself. And that makes you a better advocate. When you understand what you're going through, you understand, oh, I can label this. I understand, like, I'm going through anxiety and there are other people that go through anxiety and I'm not alone. That in itself is so empowering. And I think mental health education is the direct road to that.
Keep any final thoughts on
I
this one?
Yeah, I agree with the both of them because I feel like mental health education is more than just talking about your feelings, but also like it's very important about the education and the communication and resilience about it. So yeah, I totally agree with whatever you both have mentioned.
Yeah, and I think too, like if you look at, for instance, a plug for the Be There certificate, the first few rules are, you're going to listen and you're going to show you care, but then what, right? So it's not just about the feelings. Then what do I do with those feelings? So if it's at a point where, like, you know what, this person's, needs further help, we're going to help them explore that if we need to, and that kind of thing. And how are they going to navigate that system? We're going to help them there. How do we help them stay safe? How do I stay safe? All those different skills. And you guys have mad skills, and you've shown that here today. So thank you for that. So our final question to all of you, and it's not a little question, but there is no right or wrong because it's your personal view, and that is, what are your hopes for the future of youth mental health in Canada? I'm going to say young people's mental health because really after 18, no one wants to be called a youth. We say young people up to the age of 29. So what are your hopes for the future of young people's mental health in Canada? Akuol, we'll start with you, Ashlinn, and then Akib, you will have the final word.
Yeah. My hope for the future, for young people's mental health, is that they can normalize having conversations like we are right now about mental health and being very open about it, and that there is no stigma about it. And also that people do have access to resources in order to help, whether it's therapy, whether it's having a trusted person, it's an adult, it's a friend, it's a teammate, whoever that they can talk to. My hope also is that people would have the tools to be able to hold these sometimes heavy and sometimes uncomfortable conversations and essentially like sit in the mud with somebody. Those active listening skills, which I also would plug the Be There certificate because I felt like that was super helpful in my journey as someone who is trying to be there for my friends and be an open space. So that's something that in a perfect world I would love to see that for young people's mental health, and especially with my work in advocacy, that's my hope, that I can get that done in my short time here.
Um, I think the future of youth mental health in Canada, it definitely starts with preventative work. And I think that's the work that Jack.org is doing. I think we need to meet people where they are before they need the actual clinical help. Um, that's a large part of it, but it can't be all of it. And so, regardless of how much preventative work we do, there are going to be youth that fall through the cracks. There are going to be youth that, no matter what, struggle with their mental health. And so, to talk a little bit about Newfoundland and Labrador, because that's my Canada. Um, Here, I think we need more long term care. So, right now, we have a new mental health and addictions facility that just opened up, and it replaced our old facility. To give you an idea of how old that facility was, they actually still had what is an equivalent to jail cells in their basement, which is where mental health patients used to be kept. So it was an incredibly old building. So we have this new facility now, which in theory is wonderful, but actually has less beds than the old facility and has transitioned to acute care rather than long-term care. So that means that people come in, they get treated, but then they go away again. And as we know, mental health is a long-term journey. It's not a short journey. So this is relevant to all of Canada and not just to Newfoundland and Labrador, but we do need better long term mental health care. We need to make sure that we're meeting people where they are, but we're also following them. Um, you can't be fixed in 10 sessions, you can't be fixed in 5 sessions. And so often people wait on wait lists for years to get a very limited number of sessions. And then that's it, they're thrown to the outside again. So I think the future of mental health care has to be sustainable and long-term investment from governments, and it really has to be that long-term care piece is so critical.
100%. And also, from my perspective, the future of mental health is whenever you talk to a mental health advocate and you ask them about their journey or why they got passionate about this field, is most of their story, I'm positive, is going to start with growing up I didn't have a lot of resources, or I wasn't aware, or mental health wasn't something very accessible to me growing up, and that is why I came up out of my way and I started advocating for it. And that is something I want the future to have, and I don't want other advocates to grow up finding resources. I want resources to be accessible to them right in front of their hands so that they don't have to seek for help, but help seeks them. You know what I mean? And that is something extremely important. And obviously, I want the stereotypes and the stigma around mental health to go away so that any individual can just have a conversation and be a part of a safe space where they can just speak their mind without any fear of judgment, any fear of, just not being empathized. So yeah, having a safe space and having those open and honest conversations are really important.
Well, thank you all. And I can tell you this much, that the future of young people's mental health in Canada is at least a little better because of the three of you and the work that you're doing, speaking out, being part of the solution, encouraging others to do the same. And I'm being dead honest with you, is that, like, I talk about my generation created a lot of the challenges that you now face. The least we could do is try and give you the tools and open the doors, because with brilliant young people like yourselves leading the way, the future is in good hands. Despite all the stuff happening in the world right now, young people always give me like huge, they just inspiration, because you're so smart, you're so passionate, and you're not going to repeat the mistakes of generations past. So thank you so much. Listen, thank you for coming on today. Thank you for all you do daily. Keep moving forward. Can't wait to follow all of you and see what you do next. So appreciated. Well, there you have it. It's another episode of Jack Amplified. Today we talked about the importance of listening. We heard the terms from Akuol, sitting in the mud. I love that. I love sitting in the mud. But, it means just really being uncomfortable, or being comfortable being uncomfortable, sitting through it, trying to have that first conversation lead to the next. How to start real easy with your advocacy work, how to be part of the solution moving forward. And we debunked, I think, a few of the, theories out there around mental health. The future is in good hands with amazing advocates like we have at Jack.org. I encourage you, go to our website, check out the Be There certificate. You could do it 3 hours straight, or you could come back to it as many times as you need to. It just simplifies having those conversations, right? How to do that, whether you're a young person wanting to talk to or understand yourself and a friend, whether you're a parent wanting to talk with your child, whether you're a coach, whether you're an employer and you see a young person in the workplace that isn't showing up how they used to. It's a way to have safe and impactful conversations. Check that out, and many more of the resources at Jack.org. If you want to become a Jack speaker, a Jack Talk speaker as well, there's opportunities there for you to share your lived experience. Get out there. We pay you to do that, as we should. So be a part of the solution moving forward. Thank you so much for joining us week in and week out. I encourage you to like, rate, and subscribe, and of course share this podcast. You can find this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Until then, we'll see you next time on Jack Amplified.